I always used to be the kind of person who believed that the worst things only happen to other people. You know that slightly foolish confidence of someone who grows up hearing stories about people getting lost in the woods and thinks that wouldn't happen to me? Yeah, that was me too. Until the day a simple trail on an ordinary weekend became the heaviest memory I carry. I was 28 years old, worked sitting down all day, and was in that phase where your mind never really shuts off. My body was in one city, but my head was still trapped in emails, bills, deadlines, and noise. That's when I decided to go on a hike alone. It wasn't to prove anything to anyone, it was just silence, a place where no one asked anything of me. I chose a wooded area near a small town. Nothing famous, nothing too touristy. The kind of place with a dirt parking lot, a slightly crooked sign that says trail, and a feeling like you're stepping into a secret. I took the basics: water, a flashlight, a pocket knife, a light jacket, and my phone with a full battery. The plan was to start early, walk for 2 or 3 hours, and be back before noon. The beginning was perfect. The forest had that smell of damp leaves and living earth. Sunlight cut through the treetops in thin beams, like someone had scratched light into the air. The ground was soft, covered in branches and dry leaves, and my footsteps made a quiet sound, almost respectful. I walked calmly, breathing deeply, feeling my heart slow down. And that's when I saw the first strange thing. Tied around the trunk of a tree was a yellow ribbon. It wasn't the kind hikers usually use for trail marking. It looked like old construction tape, faded and worn, as if it had been torn from somewhere else and reused. At first, I didn't think much of it. Someone must have marked something, I thought. Further ahead, another ribbon, and then another. But the ribbons weren't marking a clear path. They were scattered, as if someone had tried to draw a direction and then given up halfway. In some spots, the ribbon was so high it seemed to have been placed by someone much taller than me. In others, it was torn, hanging like loose skin. I stopped for a moment and looked back. The trail was still there, clear and open, and I still had phone signal. Nothing was forcing me to keep going, but I convinced myself everything was normal. I needed that walk. I needed that peace. I kept going. After about 20 more minutes, the silence became different. It's hard to explain. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was as if sound had been deliberately removed. The birds, which had been singing non-stop until then, all stopped at the same time. Even the wind seemed to avoid that stretch. And then I heard a snap. Not a random branch breaking. It was a sharp, dry snap, too close to be a coincidence. It came from the right, a few meters into the dense forest. I froze. I waited for the obvious explanation: an animal, an armadillo, a monkey, but nothing appeared. Without really thinking, I called out, "Is there anyone there?" My voice came out low, small, and the sound died quickly, swallowed by the trees. Nothing answered, but 2 or 3 seconds later, there was another snap, this time from the left. That's when I felt for the first time that absurd certainty. I wasn't alone. I started walking faster. The trail began to slope gently downward, and the air grew colder, as if I were entering a place where the sun didn't reach. It was in that stretch that I noticed something even more wrong: the footprints. I don't mean old tracks. I mean clear, recent footprints in the damp mud. And they weren't mine. They were bigger, wider. Some of them sank deeper than they should have, as if whoever made them was carrying weight or was very heavy.
I tried to calm myself. It must be another hiker. But it didn't make sense. I hadn't seen anyone in the parking lot, and the trail wasn't popular. Still, I forced explanations, because that's what we do when reality gets too uncomfortable. We try to bend it until it fits what feels normal. Then the trail split. Not an official fork with a sign. It was more like a cut through the brush, a narrow path opening to the right. And there, hanging from a tree, was something that made my stomach turn. A piece of fabric. It looked like part of a t-shirt or an old cloth tied with a ribbon, but the fabric was dirty with soil and had dark stains, marks I didn't want to identify. The kind of stains you look at and your body decides on its own, don't get close. I stepped back, looked to the side, looked behind me, and then I heard breathing. It wasn't mine. Mine was stuck in my throat. It was a slow, deep breathing sound, like someone trying to control their breath, very close to me. I slowly turned my head, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of my neck. I didn't see anyone, but the breathing continued. I don't know what was worse, hearing it and seeing nothing, or realizing that even without seeing, I knew exactly where it was coming from between the trees, about 5 or 6 meters away, hidden behind a thick trunk. My body went into some kind of automatic mode. I didn't think I'm going to run, I just ran. The trail was going uphill now. I ran, stumbling, slipping, dodging branches, my mouth dry and my ears roaring with blood. And as I ran, I heard footsteps, heavy, fast footsteps, breaking leaves and branches with an ease I didn't have. They weren't far behind. They were right on me, as if whatever was chasing me was playing at almost touching, but not quite. At some point, my phone vibrated in my pocket. With a shaking hand, I pulled it out, saw the screen light up, and no signal, as if someone had ripped the network out of the air. That's when the trail disappeared. It didn't turn, it didn't get narrower, it simply ended, swallowed by the vegetation, as if I had run into a place where no path existed anymore. I stopped, gasping, spinning in place, trying to find where I had come from. And then I saw something that made me freeze completely. The yellow ribbons. They were there too, all around, on different trees, in several spots. But now I had the impression they weren't marking the trail. They were marking the area, like some kind of boundary, an invisible enclosure. And when I realized that, I heard behind me a low sound, almost a whisper.
It wasn't a word, it wasn't a sentence. It was like someone trying to imitate a human voice without knowing how. A sound that went hum, hum, and dragged on. I turned on impulse, and I saw it. I saw something between the trees, not fully, just a part, as if it knew exactly how much it needed to show to break me inside. An arm, far too long, skin far too pale, almost gray, and the hand looked large with long fingers, and it was holding a yellow ribbon, as if it were fiddling with it, gently pulling, playing. The most disturbing part is that I didn't see any face, but I felt that it was watching me with attention, curiosity, patience. I took 2 steps back. My foot hit something on the ground. I looked down and saw an old backpack, open, with things scattered around, a dented canteen, a torn pack of cookies, a cap covered in mud. And I understood, without needing any explanation, that I wasn't the first one to run there. My body finally did what it should have done from the beginning. It gave up trying to understand and decided to survive. I ran again, but this time I didn't choose a direction. I just went, pushing through branches,
tearing my shirt, feeling thorns scrape my skin, slipping in cold mud. I fell once and smashed my knee against a root. The pain flared hot, but the fear was so much greater that I got up before I even noticed I was bleeding. The footsteps behind me continued, sometimes closer, sometimes gone, as if the things stopped just to let me believe I had a chance. Until, suddenly, I heard water, the sound of a small current, a stream. I followed the sound like it was my last hope, and it really was a stream, thin, shallow, but real. And I thought, if there's a stream, there's a way. I walked along the stream, stepping on stones, letting the water hide my tracks. And there, for a few minutes, I didn't hear anything else. Just the water, just my breathing. I don't know how long I walked like that. It felt like hours, but it was probably 20 minutes, until I saw ahead an opening, light, a break in the trees. When I stepped out, I almost cried. It was the edge of the forest, a dirt road with tire marks, and further ahead, the parking lot. My car was there. I ran to it, unlocked it with shaking hands, got inside and slammed the door so hard my arm hurt. I turned the key and the engine took a second to start, and that second felt like a lifetime. When the engine finally started, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw the yellow ribbon swaying between the trees, deep inside the forest. One of them moved as if someone had touched it. I drove off without even fastening my seatbelt properly. I only stopped many miles later at a gas station surrounded by people and light, where my hands finally stopped shaking. And here comes the part that haunts me the most. That night, at home, I washed my knee, took off my torn clothes, and stared at my mud-covered sneakers. I went to empty my pockets and felt something inside my jacket, in the inner pocket. I pulled it out. It was a piece of yellow ribbon, tied into a bow like the kind you put on a gift. I swear I didn't pick that up. I don't remember touching any ribbon. I don't remember tying anything. And yet, it was there, perfect, too clean to have gone through the forest the way I did. I never went back to that trail, not ever. And when people ask me why I don't go on those solo adventures anymore, I laugh, make excuses, talk about work, talk about lack of time. Because how am I supposed to explain that in there's something that doesn't need to show itself completely to convince you that you've already lost? And worse, how am I supposed to explain that sometimes when I close my eyes in the silence of my bedroom, I can still hear that calm, patient breathing, as if it were still following me?
Story 2: When the Forest Began to Give Back. I was never the kind of person who liked hiking. I always admired the idea from a distance, pretty photos, smiling people surrounded by nature, but deep down I carried an old discomfort with dense forests, a fear with no clear origin, as if my body knew something my mind insisted on ignoring. Even so, I went. At the time, I was 24 years old and accepted an invitation to go on a group hike on a Sunday morning. The proposal was simple, calm, almost tourist-like, a path considered easy with a stream in the middle and a return the same day. I went more out of stubbornness than desire. I wanted to prove to myself that fear meant nothing. There were 4 of us, all different, all confident that nothing would get out of control. The beginning of the trail reinforced that feeling. The sky was clear, sunlight filtered through the trees, and the path was well marked, the kind of place that makes you relax too quickly. As we moved forward, the forest began to change in subtle ways. The trees grew closer together, the light dimmed,
and the air became colder in a way that didn't match the time of day. I felt a chill run along my arms and tried to justify it as sweat drying on my skin, but something inside me was already on alert. That was when the silence became noticeable. It wasn't a total absence of sound, but a kind of emptiness. There were no birds singing, no insects, no wind moving the leaves. It was as if that part of the forest was holding its breath. Shortly after, I noticed a strange smell, a sweet and rotten odor at the same time, like overripe fruit mixed with something far too old. It wasn't a normal forest smell. It was the smell of something decomposing. Even so, we kept going. The trail went downhill toward a stream. The plan was to stop there, rest, and then head back. When the sound of running water appeared, I felt a little safer. Water usually means life, movement, continuity. But the feeling didn't last long. The water in the stream was far too dark for such a shallow stretch. In some places, it looked almost black, as if the bottom were deep, even though it wasn't. When we touched the surface, it became clear that something was wrong. The water felt thicker, leaving a grayish substance clinging to objects. While we rested on the bank, something on the other side of the stream caught my attention. Between the trees, there was a dark opening, like a natural corridor formed by the vegetation. In the center of that space, something was hanging. It didn't move with the wind. It didn't look light. The immediate sensation was of repulsion, even without identifying exactly what it was. Not long after that, the environment completely changed. Sounds began to come from within the forest on the other side of the stream. They didn't sound like small animals. They were heavy, slow movements, as if something large were moving without hurry. That was when I noticed marks in the mud along the bank. Large, deep marks, recent. They weren't shoe or sneaker prints. They had no sole pattern. The shape was strange, wide, with elongated marks at the front, as if the toes were far too long.
Fear began to spread in a physical way. My heart raced, my breathing shortened, and my body entered a state of urgency. The decision to go back came without discussion. Something was far too wrong to keep going. On the way back, the trail seemed different, more closed in, longer, as if the space were adjusting itself around us. The feeling was like walking through a corridor that was slowly narrowing. That's when we realized that one person from the group was no longer there. The disappearance was instantaneous, without noise, without signs of struggle, as if the forest had simply closed its hand and taken what it wanted. Panic set in. Fear stopped being abstract and became a concrete presence. That was when a sound appeared behind us, coming from within the forest. It wasn't exactly a voice, but an attempt, a deep, dragged-out sound, trying to imitate something human. The worst detail was that the sound tried to reproduce names, incorrectly, incompletely, like someone learning to speak from listening from far away. The feeling wasn't of immediate pursuit, but of observation, as if whatever it was were experimenting. Instinct took control. We started running without planning, without a clear direction, just escape. Branches struck our bodies, roots appeared underfoot. The rotten smell grew stronger, as if it were clinging to us. At one point, something grabbed a leg from behind. It wasn't a human hand. The grip was too firm, too cold, with long, thin fingers that didn't seem to belong to anything alive. The release came abruptly, almost as if it had let go by choice. Before it vanished, it was possible to see part of its skin, far too pale, mottled, with a wet appearance, like something that had spent too much time in water.
That image burned itself into my memory. The running continued until light finally reappeared between the trees. The beginning of the trail came into view at last, along with the parking lot. When we left the forest, the body gave in. Legs failed. Tears came without control, as if all the accumulated fear had finally been allowed to exist. Searches were carried out. People looked. Teams entered the forest. Nothing was found. The forest gave back only silence. The detail that never leaves me in peace came later, already at home. When I took off my clothes, I noticed a purple mark on my arm, 3 parallel lines as if fingers had pressed hard. It didn't hurt like a scratch, it hurt like pressure. At the center of the marks, there was a small dark point, almost like the imprint of a fingertip. Since that day, I avoid any place with dense forest, and sometimes, when I'm alone and everything goes quiet, I have the absurd feeling that something is still practicing, trying to remember, trying to repeat, as if the forest hadn't taken one person that day, as if it had learned something about us.
Story 3: The Path That Remembered Me. I went on that trail thinking I was returning to a familiar place. That was my first mistake. Familiarity is dangerous because it makes us lower our guard. I had been in that forest before, years earlier, during a completely different phase of my life. Back then, nothing happened. No scares, no strange events, just an ordinary walk. So when I decided to return, I thought I knew exactly what to expect. I was alone. I had always preferred solitary hikes because the silence helped me think. I told myself that isolation was a choice, not loneliness. The day was cloudy, but bright enough, the kind of weather that makes the green look darker and the air feel heavier. The trail entrance was exactly as I remembered it. The same old sign, the same wide path at the beginning, the same smell of damp earth. Everything seemed intact, preserved in time. It gave me a strange sense of comfort, as if the place were welcoming me back. As I moved forward, I began to notice small details that felt out of place. Nothing obvious, just subtleties. Broken branches at strange heights, marks on the trunks of some trees, like old scratches, but far too deep to have been made by ordinary animals. I observed them, noted them mentally, and kept going. After about half an hour, something changed. Not in the environment, but in me. A clear sensation of being watched settled in. Not like paranoia, but like a physical certainty. That pressure at the back of the neck, as if something were aligned exactly behind me, matching every step. I stopped walking for a few seconds just to test it. The silence remained intact. No sound betrayed any presence. I continued. The next stretch of the trail was more enclosed. The trees curved slightly inward, forming a kind of natural tunnel. The light dimmed there, and the air felt denser, almost hard to breathe. That was when I noticed something impossible. There were footprints on the ground. They were identical to mine. The same tread pattern from my boot, the same size, the same depth. The difference was that they weren't only going in the same direction as me. Some went the opposite way, others crossed over, as if I had walked there several times before, recently. I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe I had passed through earlier and didn't remember. I thought someone else might have identical boots. I thought of anything that would push away the conclusion that felt too obvious. But the discomfort grew. The trail began to feel longer than it should have. Turns appeared where I didn't remember any. Areas that used to be open were now closed off by dense vegetation.
In one specific stretch, I was absolutely certain that that path had not existed the last time I was there. Even so, I kept going. The silence started to become truly unsettling. There were no insects, no birds, no wind. The sound of my own footsteps felt muffled, as if the ground were absorbing the noise. That's when I noticed another disturbing detail: the smell. It wasn't the smell of obvious rot, but of something old, something forgotten, like a place that had been closed off for a long time. A smell that triggered a bad memory, even without me knowing exactly which one. At a certain point, I felt an urgent need to look back, not from sudden fear, but from a strange sense of delay, as if something were walking out of sync with me. When I turned, I saw nothing, but the footprints behind me were different. The older prints looked deeper now, as if they had been pressed again, as if someone had stepped exactly on them after I passed.
My heart sped up, and I decided to turn back. It hadn't felt like a good idea for a while now. I carefully turned around, trying to memorize the way. And that was when the trail changed again. The path back was not the same. The natural tunnel was gone. The trees were arranged differently. It felt like walking through a place that was imitating the original, but not getting it quite right. That was when I heard something. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't a branch breaking. It was breathing, very close. It didn't come from a specific point. It seemed spread through the air, as if the environment itself were breathing with me, at the same rhythm, inhaling when I inhaled, exhaling when I exhaled. I picked up my pace. The footprints began to appear ahead of me again, identical to mine, too fresh to be old. It was as if someone were walking ahead of me, reproducing my movements exactly. In a more open stretch, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A tree had recent marks, as if someone had leaned against it with force. The height of those marks matched the height of my shoulders, and between them there were thinner, longer marks that were not human fingers. The feeling that I wasn't just being followed, but studied, became overwhelming. I tried to run. The forest didn't react the way it should have. The ground felt too uneven, as if it were forming under my feet just to throw me off balance. Branches appeared at strange angles. The trail seemed to stretch with every meter I ran. And then came the worst part. I heard my own sound. Not my voice speaking words, but the exact sound of my breathing coming from another point on the trail, slightly delayed, like an imperfect echo, but far too close to be natural. That was when I understood. The forest wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to repeat me. At a point where the trail made a sharp curve, I saw something ahead, a silhouette standing still among the trees. The shape was human, about my height, a similar posture, but there was something wrong with the outline. The arms looked too long. The head was slightly tilted, as if it didn't quite know how to hold its own weight. I didn't get any closer. My body refused. The silhouette didn't move. It just stayed there, as if it were incomplete, awaiting instructions. The feeling that took over wasn't immediate fear. It was something worse. It was recognition, as if that thing were occupying a space that used to be mine. I took slow steps backwards, never taking my eyes off that shape, and as I retreated, I noticed that the trees around it seemed to lean closer, as if they were protecting it. At some point, light began to appear between the trees. I don't remember exactly how I reached the trail exit. I only remember the sensation of crossing an invisible boundary and feeling the air change instantly. When I left the forest, my legs gave out. I leaned against my car, trying to understand what had just happened. The sensation of being watched stopped suddenly, as if something had been left behind, or as if something had been left there, in my place. That night, at home, I tried to sleep. When I finally drifted off, I woke up startled with a strange sense of displacement, like I was in the wrong place. In the bathroom mirror, I noticed something small but disturbing, a thin scratch on my shoulder, parallel to two others, exactly in the same place as the marks I had seen on the tree. I don't remember hurting myself. Since then, something has changed. Sometimes I have short memory lapses, moments when I can't quite remember what I did or where I went. And in dreams, I walk along a trail that looks like me, but isn't completely mine. What scares me most isn't the idea that something tried to kill me in that forest. It's the possibility that something tried to replace me.